King Olaf had taken the Christian faith, and so had most of his men. The king told Leif of the glory and strength in this Christian faith, and of how the White Christ had conquered Odin and Thor and chased them into the underworld. So Leif was christened. And when spring came, the king asked him to return home and take the Christian faith to Greenland. In great friendship, the king wished Leif good speed and gave him many gifts. Among these were Heg and Hegi, 2 Scottish thralls who could run faster than any deer. "Use them if ever you need anyone who can travel fast," said King Olaf. And Leif hoisted his sail and steered straight to the west, for now he wanted to do a feat that no other sailor had done before, and sail without stop from Norway to Greenland. But in a great storm the waves rose so high they nudged the moon, and his ship swayed like a rocking horse. For a long time it was thrown about on the sea. Then the wind calmed down and a heavy fog fell over them. Leif could see neither whales, nor the sun, nor the color of the sea to guide his way, but he sailed on, thinking, "If I don't find Greenland, maybe I'll find the land that Bjarni saw." At last the fog lifted enough for Leif's keen eyes to pierce it, and there, straight ahead, he saw land. It was a beautiful land with forests of strange trees growing all the way down to the shores. "No one shall laugh at us as they laughed at Bjarni, and say we didn't explore the land," said Leif. So he sailed up to the shore and landed at the mouth of a river. He sent Heg and Hegi to run over all the hills, and when they came back and said they had seen neither people nor smoke from the fires, Leif and his men went ashore and built themselves houses. All through the summer they lived in great plenty and were carefree and did nothing but enjoy the land, for it was so rich that wild grains and grapevines and all kinds of fruits grew there. And Leif gave the land a name and called it Vinland, or Wineland. The sun stood so high in the sky that Leif knew he was very far to the south. When fall came, he loaded his ship with grapes and precious lumber and sailed off toward the north and a little toward the east. So well did he guide his ship that when he had sailed for a while he sighted the Greenland glaciers. But suddenly he changed his course, and his men asked, "Why do you steer so close to the wind? Don't you see anything?" said Leif. "I see a ship or a cliff." Yes, then they saw it too, and it was a cliff. But Leif saw further than the others, and he saw that people were shipwrecked there. And close to the wind, right up to the rock, Leif steered his ship and saved them all and much of their goods. Then he sailed home to Bertali, and when Eric the Red saw Leif's ship, he mounted his horse and rode to the shore to give his son a stately welcome. From far and near, people came to hear about Vinland and about Leif's deeds and adventures, and from this time on he was called Leif the Lucky. But Eric grumbled in his beard when he heard that Leif had taken the new faith and had come home to christen them all. The old gods were good enough for him. Leif's mother soon became a Christian and built a church at Bertali, and Leif introduced Christianity all over Greenland. Also, in this, he showed himself a good man and a leader. Later he made another voyage to Vinland, and his brothers Tarvold and Thorstein sailed for Vinland too. But the one never found his way, and the other never returned. Then Gudrid, the widow of Thorstein, came to Bertali to live. She was as gentle as she was lovely, and a soothsayer had promised her a great future in a distant land. One summer, a merchantman called Thorfinn Karlsefni came sailing his ship to Bertali. Thorfinn soon fell in love with Gudrid, and as he was rich and high-born, he was well received when he asked her in marriage. And that winter it was decided that Thorfinn and Gudrid should sail to Vinland to make their home there. Leif helped them in every way. He told them how to sail, sent with them some of his sailors and also Heg and Hegi, and said they could use his houses in Vinland. In the spring, Thorfinn and Gudrid set off. With them sailed 2 more ships and 150 Norsemen with cattle and household goods. They sailed west over dark waters till they came to a land with hoar-frosted mountains. The shores were covered with stone slabs so big that 2 men could lie upon them and kick each other with their feet. And from behind each slab sly foxes peeped. From stone slab land they sailed southward till they came to another land that was covered by dense forests, guarded by ferocious bears. From forest land they sailed south along sandy shores that never seemed to come to an end. But at last they came to a fjord, and in the middle of the current there lay an island, and on the island there were so many birds and eggs there was hardly room to put a foot. Now Thorfinn sent out Heg and Hegi, After 3 days they came running back with grapevines and wisps of grains in their hands. Then Thorfinn knew that they weren't far from Vinland the Good. Here Thorfinn and his people put ashore their cattle to graze, and even when winter came there was grass, for it wilted but little. That winter a baby boy was born to Gudrid and Thorfinn. Thorfinn put his son on his knees and named him Snorri, and this Snorri was the first white child ever born in America. When spring came, Thorfinn led the ship still further south, and now they came to Vinland the Good. Here they all liked it and settled down to live, and Snorri grew big and strong in the sun. But on a fair day, when everything was all pleasure and joy, the Norsemen saw a number of skin boats rounding the point to the south. In the boats were dark-skinned people with black and unkempt hair, and they all had sticks in their hands, which they whirled to the right. It sounded as if they were threshing. "Maybe this is a sign of peace," said one of Thorfinn's men, and the Norsemen held their white shields toward them, for this was their sign of friendship. The natives came ashore, and they gazed at each other. Then the natives jumped into their boats and paddled off again. Skrölingar was what the Norsemen called these people. They saw no more of them for a while. Then the dark men came back in great numbers, and wanted to barter fine furs. Gudrid gave them clamber and cream and cheese and butter, and they licked their fingers and traded beautiful furs for this milk, food they had never tasted before. Thorfinn had brought big balls of red cloth. He cut it up into narrow strips and traded it a foot for each fur. The Skrölingar all wanted red cloth, so when there was little left, he cut it up into finger-wide strips, and for a foot of this he got just as much fur, yes, even more. When all the cloth was gone, the Norsemen had great heaps of fur, and the Skrölingar strutted about wrapped in red ribbons. Now Thorfinn had a big bull that was grazing in the woods, and the sight of all the red cloth must have made the bull angry, for all of a sudden, with a roar and a bellow, he charged straight for the Skrölingar. The Skrölingar, who had never seen a bull before, jumped and ran and raced for their boats, and much offended they paddled away. Thorfinn and his men laughed till they fell on their backs. But they didn't laugh when 3 weeks later the Skrölingar came paddling back in such great numbers that it looked as if coals were strewn on the water. Now they all yelled and whirled their sticks fiercely to the left. Then the Norsemen grasped their red shields and ran to meet them in battle, for they weren't men to shun a fight whatever the numbers against them. The Skrölingar leapt from their boats and slung something huge and black toward the Norsemen. It looked like a black ball, or rather more like a giant sheep's belly. It hissed over their heads and came down among them with a terrible crash. This didn't seem natural to the Norsemen. A great fear came over them, and they turned and ran. But now it seemed that even the trees were turning into Skrölingar wherever they ran. The Norsemen were spellbound and confused, but the women were not. They urged their men to fight. And when the Skrölingar saw a Viking woman sharpening a sword on her own skin, they in turn were startled and fled. From now on, the Norsemen didn't feel safe in Vinland, and they longed for their homeland far away in the north. It was cold and barren there, but it belonged only to them and their people. Soon they decided to return. They loaded their ships with timber and furs and sailed northward. Now they saw Skrölingar whenever they came close to shore. One day they caught 2 boys, and Thorfinn took them along in his ship, and they sailed past the Birds' Island, and they sailed past Forest Land, and they sailed past Stone Slab Land, and they sailed again over dark waters back to Greenland. And while the ice closed in around Greenland and locked it away from the rest of the world, they all sat together again in the smoke-filled hall in Brutali. Leif sat in the high seat now, for Eric the Red had died, old and full of days, and Leif played with Snorri and listened to the Vinland stories. The 2 Skrölingar boys soon learned the language, and they told many stories about their people. They had no houses, they said, but lived in holes and dens, and were ruled by 2 kings who were called Avaldemon and Valdidida. The Norsemen all agreed that the natives made the new lands too dangerous to live in, but it would be good to send ships there for timber, as the voyage to Vinland and Forest Land was much shorter than that to Norway. When spring came, Thorfinn sailed to Norway with Gudrid and Snorri. There he sold his fine furs and fancy woods for much silver and gold. Rich and respected, he and Gudrid settled down in Iceland, where Snorri grew up, soon forgetting his faraway birthplace. Leif stayed in Greenland. As long as he lived, he was highly honored, and even after his death, the story of Leif the Lucky, the first white man who discovered America, lived on. For hundreds of years after Leif's time, the ships of the Norsemen on Greenland plowed the northern seas to bring timber from America's forests. Then came many years of cold weather all over the world, and the patches of grass on Greenland grew smaller and smaller. Also the cattle grew smaller, for they had less to eat. The horses became as small as ponies, and the cows became almost as small as goats. Even the tall Norsemen grew smaller. The son became smaller than his father, and his son became smaller again, for they had neither porridge nor bread to eat. As they grew smaller, they also lost their skill and forgot how to make sturdy, sea-going ships. Without good ships, they could neither sail to Norway for food nor to America for timber to build new ships. And at last they had only small boats made of skin for fishing in the Greenland fjords. Soon everybody had forgotten about the Norsemen in Greenland. And several hundred years later, when sailors from Norway again came to Greenland, they found no Norsemen, but in their place, short-legged Eskimos trudging in the ice and snow. Though this story of Leif the Lucky was written down in old manuscripts, nobody read them for hundreds of years. As the Norsemen in Greenland were forgotten, so were the stories of Vinland, and still for many hundred years the Indians in America could enjoy their land in peace.